Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball
with Eir Sport. Watch live Pro 14 action on Eir Sport this season. Visit airsport.ie.
And you're very welcome along to this edition of Monday Night Rugby. It's Richie here with you, joined in studio by Rory O'Connor of the Irish Independent, and on the line joins us Eddie O'Sullivan, the former Ireland head coach. Good evening to you both. It's been a mixed weekend for the Irish provinces across the weekend. Ulster with that draw with the Cheetahs in South Africa, bringing their excursion down in the Capes to a close. Cardiff beating Munster quite comprehensively 37-13 on Friday night. Then on Saturday we had the two victories for Irish sides, perhaps most impressively Connacht's 33-20 victory over the Scarlets at the Sports Ground, and then Leinster firmly in control against Edinburgh from start to finish and brushing them aside by 31 points to 7. It's with that Connacht result we'll start. Rory, you're saying you watched this one back and they looked really, really impressive. The bits and pieces that I've seen of them in that game suggest that things, with the full complement of players being finally available to them, things are starting to click for Andy Friend and Connacht.
Yeah, it looks that way. They were very impressive. They, I mean, they have the same record as Munster, but I suppose it's where you come from. It's the base that we came from last year, and that was the kind of game I think that they probably would have struggled in last year. And even they've had two really big tests at home. They've had Glasgow come and they've had Scarlets, and they let it slip against Glasgow. They got themselves in the winning position in both games. Scarlets came back at them, scored a try, got it back to 6 points, but Connacht were able to power on, get their own try, an excellent score from Adia Loken set up by Sean O'Brien, and that just was a sign maybe that even in the 4 weeks that they've been playing, they're kind of starting to grow as a team. They looked strong. Like the set piece was kind of a little bit iffy, but they managed it. They lost Gavin Thornbury to an injury which looks like it could be a little bit serious, which is unfortunate. But they managed through that. Bundy Aki was excellent. Kieran Marmion was very good. He kept the tempo high. They tapped a lot of penalties. They kept Scarlets on their toes, and yeah, they beat a very good team, playing very well. Possibly would be looking, if they get in that scenario again in a couple of months, they'll be looking for a bonus point out of that game. But I suppose it's baby steps a little bit. There's signs of progress and signs of life under Andy Friend.
There was suggestions, Eddie. We saw Jack Carty quoted before the season saying that there's no point in them getting up for these games against Leinster, Munster and Ulster. They have to actually perform against the sides from Scotland and Wales and South Africa week in and week out if they're actually going to get what they hope will be a playoff spot this season. It's performances like Saturday's just gone, I guess, that's going to be a massive boon towards getting to what they want to do, which is that playoff spot and a return to the Champions Cup.
Well, yeah, that's true, because it's a league, not a knockout competition. So they've got to deliver week in, week out to try and get into that playoff spot at the end of the season. I mean, I thought they played very well. They looked like they know what they were doing. Their game is a good balance to it. They're playing with tempo. It's kind of looking a bit back towards the Pat Lammy era when they played with that sort of kind of, I suppose, a bit of abandon about it, But I suppose at the same time, I just don't want to get too carried away in a sense, because I think the next couple of weeks tells a big story. The Interpros really are a great leveller. No matter how things are going, you find out where you really stand. And I think a lot of the problems at the moment aren't quite sure, because you're playing teams that maybe don't pitch up really well, or they're teams you should beat. Like, for example, the Munster game down in Cork against the Ospreys, we thought that might be something to look at, but was terrible. So the reason I look at Scarlets is I'm kind of worried about Scarlets, and I'd say like they missed 30 tackles, which is like unbelievable for Scarlets. And the reason I'm thinking of that is maybe Scarlets are going through the Wayne Pivac exit. He's definitely leaving Scarlets, and teams kind of with the best skill in the world, they don't play with the same intensity when the coach is halfway out the door. So, maybe this was a great performance, and Scarlets will kick on this year, and they'll take other scabs, and the Connacht one will stand alone. But it was a good performance by Connacht. They can only play what's in front of them. But I'm just wondering about Scarlets as a team, where they are at the moment. When you miss 30 tackles, that's a red flag for me in terms of a team that are really out there wanting to put their bodies on the line. But, fairness to Connacht, they took advantage of that. And I suppose next week we'll tell a different story when Leinster roll into town.
Yeah, but as you mentioned, Rory, it's been fantastic when you see certain players working their way back in from the international point of view. It might take them a couple of weeks to bed in. For a case like Bundy Aki, the way he performed on his return to the side in his first start was just impeccable, and a fantastic note of, I suppose, optimism for Joe Schmidt going forward into the autumn.
Absolutely. I think it was one of the things that probably was a bit harsh on Kieran Keane, was that he took over Connacht when Bundy Aki finally qualified to play for Ireland, and then suddenly wasn't available for almost, I don't know if it's half the games, but a sizable portion of the games over the course of the season. And I think during the league winning season and during everything Pat Lam did, it was built around Bundee Aki. Both the attack and defence. He's such a leader for them, and it's not a leader in words, he's a leader in deeds. He just carries so hard, so directly, wins collisions, gets up, goes again, frees his hands. The try set up for Tom Farrell, that was, it was all him, and Farrell ran a nice line off him. He was really, really excellent, and him and Marmion coming in and starting the game as internationals looked like internationals coming back and playing for them. And the struggle Connacht might have over the course of a 20-odd game season is the weeks when those players are not allowed to play, especially with the extra game in November for Ireland. So Bundee Aki, being managed as he is now, won't be there every week, but he's the kind of player that when he is there, they really, really they rely heavily on him because he's so good, and he had such an impact on the game. And the Scarlets probably try and target him a little bit in defence. They probably try and isolate him a bit, but he kind of made a beeline for Reece Patchell every time he had the ball. He nailed him once in defence as well. He was really, really on it, and it's a great sign for Ireland because Ringrose and Henshaw weren't too shabby up in Leinster either.
Yeah, how do you see that? I suppose we can get to the formations and how Joe Schmidt might go about picking a side later on in the next few weeks, Eddie. But in terms of Bundee Aki, he's definitely got to be in consideration for one of those two starting places in the main, I guess, autumn internationals for Ireland.
Well, I'm sure Joe Schmidt will have his pecking order in his head, and be hoping when you put a pecking order down for yourself as a coach, you're hoping that the guys end up as you stack them. Like you have your number 1, your number 2, and number 3. I still suspect Robbie Henshaw is the number 1 choice for 12 in Ireland, particularly playing with Sexton and playing with Sexton and Ringrose outside him. So I think that's what Joe Schmidt thinks his midfield is. Now, if Robbie Henshaw had a drop in form and Bundee Aki is still lighting up, I think there's a chance there. But I think it's a harder one for Bundee Aki to make his case as if Henshaw is playing to par, So that's where that discussion will be. And I think Ringrose is pretty much probably bolted in outside centre because that's probably his best position. There isn't an obvious outside centre jumping out to take that spot off. But again, his form has been a bit patchy, so it'll be interesting to see if he's still the standout number 13 come November. But a little bit to go yet. Like you've got the Interpros, you've got Europe, they're often where you get your best data in terms of a player's form. So I still think Bundee Aki could be a bench impact player off the bench for Joe Schmidt. Like puts the guy you'd like to drop into the mix with 20 minutes to go when guys are getting a bit tired, and then he runs over a few people. So he could have that impact role more than a starting role, unless he beats out Henshaw, but I doubt it.
There was a lot made in the build-up to Saturday's game from Connacht's point of view of Jack Carty and his potential influence on that side, not just against the Scarlets, but going forward throughout the season. Richie Murphy, the Ireland skills and kicking coach, was down there at Connacht in the build-up to Saturday's game as well. They clearly have an eye on Carty. Like the feudal system in terms of how it has for Ireland is pretty much set in stone. We know it's Sexton and then Carberry is the alternate. And then the third spot, I guess, in that squad for the autumn is pretty wide open when you consider what Ross Byrne went to South Africa, or went on the summer tour at least, and we had the likes of Madigan, the likes of Jackson, who obviously aren't going to be involved now. So that third spot looks like it will be open to someone like Jack Carty if his performances keep up.
Yeah, I think Billy Burns is in the equation as well. The English number 10 has come over to play for Ulster, who's Irish qualified. His brother Freddie played for England, but he hasn't played for England, so he's been signed with that in mind, and he's getting a lot of minutes at number 10 for Ulster, alongside Cooney, who's potentially going to be in there as well, and I think he's been signed with a view to being a contender for the World Cup. So I think that it's pretty even between himself and Byrne, and I think Carty has some way to make up just based on selections in the past. Joe's never really, I think he was in a camp about 2 years ago, but he's never really been involved. But I thought he was excellent on Saturday. I thought his option taking was on the money. His kicking was very, very accurate. His passing was on the money as well. And he kicked his goals. And he looked like a player playing with a huge amount of confidence. A player who at 26 has put all of the experiences, good and bad, that he's had over the last 4 or 5 years behind him, and is really just looks at home and at one with himself, and is enjoying his rugby as a result. And He's got internationals playing either side of him with Marmion and Bundy Aki, who obviously take some pressure off him on, with decision making in defence. But he looked, and I was really impressed with him. I was at the first game of the season against Glasgow as well, and he was really good that night, that day. And they took him off with about 15 minutes to go. And, look, they had the GPS stats. I'm sure he was tiring, but I thought it was one of the things that went wrong for him in the last 15. I think he's really maturing into an excellent, excellent player. I think he has a journey to go to convince Joe Schmidt that he is the number 3 out half. But he's in with a shit. Like, he's only certainly one injury away from being a serious contention, because there's just not that many out halves playing top level rugby. And if he's doing what he did on Saturday on a consistent basis, it's very hard to ignore that sort of form. He was really, really good.
Yeah, what Rory says there is kind of mimicked by Dara Ruddy, has been in touch on YouTube. Eddie says, has Jack Carty's continually improving form put him in the picture for higher honours given the control he exerted on Saturday? It's the accuracy with the kicking, the decision making with the kicking, it all seemed, and even his passing as well, as Andy Friend pointed out. Now, off both sides, he looks really, really comfortable. It was one of those consummate performances, but one you'd want to see mirrored throughout the rest of the season from Carty's point of view, Eddie.
Well, I agree completely with that. I think that's a very good assessment of him. I think he's probably, at this moment in time, playing his best rugby in his career, which I suppose, a guy, every player has a kind of a pathway to follow to get to their potential, and he seems to have got better and better with time. He's a good age, he's 25, he's a lot of experience now, and he knows Connacht rugby, he knows the guys around him, and he's playing, like, he's shown a leadership role, in the way he's running the game. So I think there is a third slot there that's open. I mean, I think Carberry is nailed into number 2, but the number 3 slot is up for grabs. I mean, Ian Keatley was there as well. He seems to have drifted out of it. Ross Byrne was a choice going to the summer tour, but if we go through the next month and Ross Byrne doesn't play much rugby, as is likely because he's sitting in behind Jonathan Sexton, and Carty still lights it up, it's a very strong case for being the number 3. And, Freddie Byrne is going to be tipping along there as well. But at the moment, I think he edges out Freddie Byrne in terms of always controlling games. I just think that'll be my own take, but everyone has their own opinion. But I think at the moment, if he holds the form he has right through to the autumn, he could find himself getting a look in at the back end against the USA or something like that. That wouldn't be beyond the bounds possibility. But he does have to build on what he's done before, but assuming he will, I think he can make a great case for it.
How regular an occurrence, Eddie, would be the IRFU sending somebody like Richie Murphy down to training to kind of oversee things, have a look in particularly in the lead up to a game like the Scarlet's just gone? Like, how often does that kind of thing happen?
Well, you'd like to think it happens fairly frequently, because you might do the same with your defence coach, you might do the same with your skills coach. It's just kind of getting everybody on the same page. But with the specialist skills, particularly someone like Richie Murphy taking his place kicking and working with him, and would also be an indication that, and you suppose you could say maybe not as well, but that he might be at some point finding his way into an Irish camp, and Richie Murphy will be working with him again. Richie Murphy might have gone down to have a gauge and see how he's going, So all that's a positive thing for him. The fact that George Schmidt has taken enough interest to send the kicking coach down to him, they're all positives as I would see it. Now look, there's a little bit to travel yet, but I really believe if he holds his form right through the next 2 weekends in the Interpros and through Europe, he makes a strong case as the number 3. I think that's about as much you can hope for at the moment. But as you said, look, injuries can change everything. That's the nature of the game. Andy
Friend afterwards, Rory, was pretty. He wasn't necessarily going to take all the praise for the performance on Saturday. He was deflecting a lot of it down on Nigel Carroll and Pete Wilkins as well, saying, listen, those are their plays, this is the work that they did before I arrived here. I haven't waved a magic wand and suddenly everything is rosy in the garden. I mean, clearly the results in the opening couple of games of the season bear that out, but there does seem to be a little bit more confidence spread throughout the side. There seems to be a sense that the Connacht of Pat Lam has re-emerged in a slightly different form, in a slightly positive form. The Kieran Keane experiment, we'll call it, has kind of quickly been forgotten about, and probably rightly so.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. I mean, if he's giving the credit to his assistants, then you have to take him at face value. And there were some starter plays that came off that looked really impressive. The players are clearly playing for him. It's very early in the season to make any massive judgments, but there's definitely a pattern to the way they're playing. There's definitely a clear structure to the way they're playing. They looked like a very together unit, and they looked at times last season like they weren't playing for their coach, and that was a reflection on a bad camp down there. That things went badly, but he's got they recruited well over the summer. I think they've brought in a couple of good players. They they enjoy playing on that hard track. They're enjoying the good weather. I mean, they're going to have to develop something different for when the conditions change, because when they did have to try and get down and dirty, they had a couple of mistakes. Their mould didn't really get going. So there's definitely, like, you can't make any judgments after 4 games, positive or negative, but you can definitely see that there's a signs of something beginning there that looks very positive. And he has players like Jack Carty playing with confidence, and they're all playing.
Adi Loken's another one as well. He's almost become the forgotten man in terms of wing play for Ireland.
Yeah, he won his 1 cap and hasn't really gotten back in, and he looked bigger. I thought he looks like he's filled out.
He's hit the gym.
He has definitely hit the gym, and the results are pretty positive. He's in a very crowded field, and it's a position that Joe played wing himself, and I think he judges wingers with more scrutiny than any other position, and he has some serious players to jump ahead of. But look, he's not starting for Connacht. He needs to get that starting jersey first there before he kind of makes the next stride. It looks like Kelleher and Healy are playing well and are getting the nod ahead of him. But he's he offers something that few Irish players have, in that raw pace that he can attack with. He's been really impressive off the bench the last 2 weeks, and his finishing ability is unquestioned. I think it's probably the nuts and bolts of his game around that will be, that probably get him out of squads rather than into them. But as Eddie said, there's 4 games this November. It's probably going to be a bigger squad than normal. There's probably going to be opportunities for players. I think Adi Loken probably has a journey to go to get in. But he's uniquely talented if he can get into the team and be consistent. I think Joe's shown that if you're consistent and you're doing well, there is going to be chances for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And don't forget, our Rugby and Off the Ball is with thanks to Eir Sport, the home of rugby in Ireland. Eddie, I want to turn to Munster. As you mentioned, like 4 or 5 games isn't necessarily a huge sample size to be judging a side on, and they do still have players like Keith Earls to come back in. But when they put in a performance like they did against Cardiff the other night and go nearly an hour essentially in the game without scoring, there have to be worries there. We were praising them to the hilt this time last week, saying that things look like they might be finally clicking, and then they go and put in a performance like that.
Yeah, well, I think we praised them in the context of beating an Osprey second 15, and we said, look, that they could only do what they could do. But the worrying thing for Munster is that there are 2 decent tests this year they come up well short. Like Glasgow was a poor performance, and the Cardiff Blues was very poor as well. The 2 games they've won at home were pretty much training runs, so it's hard to know where they are, and that's a worry for Van Graan. Like, he has to wonder, where are they as a team? Now, the team that played last week is a pretty strong Munster team. It's not a team that you would say if they had to go into Europe, but they'd be lost. That's a strong Munster side. Okay, I know Keith Earls has to come back in as well, but they had CJ Standard on deck. Who's a talisman. They had O'Mahony on deck, 2 Irish internationals, and they still got bullied around the place. I'm a little bit worried for them, and I think my worry is that they're going to be under pressure to deliver when it counts, and particularly that could be like in the interpros. If for some reason Ulster were to scalp them next week in Limerick, that now you'd have a crisis in your hands. There's no doubt you could avoid it otherwise other than that. So they really do have to win next week and play well to kind of prove to themselves that the form is there, just they need to grab it and run with it. But I have to say I'm a little bit worried. I mean, I thought they were very, very poor the other night. They really, it was hard to find that in their game that was really, uplifting. They were well beaten, and the tries they got were basically, what worries me is they were tries that weren't constructed out of attack. Like, one was a turnover. Andrew Conway's try, the first one I think was a turnover. Another one came from a line break from Joy Carberry and broken play. But you got to wonder, if they win a scrum or line out in an attack opposition, where do they take a team through 10, 15, 20 phases necessary and score? It's what we see Leinster doing all the time. That patience on the ball, the ability to break teams down. Munster aren't doing that at the moment. And I suppose defensively they have been very poor. They were very poor in Glasgow defensively, and they were very poor against Cardiff defensively. So they're 2 weak parts of your game. What are you going to do to break down the opposition? What are you going to stop the opposition? I think they really have questions to answer on both of those precincts. Yeah,
they are. Johan Van Graan already looked fairly frustrated, I remember, in the wake of that Glasgow defeat. And again, this defeat to Cardiff won't do his nerves any much use, because, again, like Eddie said, there were so many areas of the game where they fell flat that you kind of figure, where are you going to start with trying to improve upon that performance, especially with the Interpros to come, and then off the back of that, the start of the Champions Cup season. I mean, it's a worry. 4 games in, you don't want to panic, but it is a worrying aspect of their game.
They've 3 weeks to get it right. So they've Exeter away in the first round of the Champions Cup. Exeter nilled them in pre-season and have kicked on from there and have started really well in England. So they have 2 games to get it right for that. So they've Ulster at home and Leinster away. I think I'd fancy them to beat Ulster at home. It's their away form that's slightly concerning. Well, it's not more than slightly concerning. It's definitely concerning. And to go to the Aviva to play against the Leinster team, who looked so good on Saturday, is going to be a big challenge for them, particularly when they can pick their first choice back row, and pretty much a team that you wouldn't look at that team that played on Saturday and think that that could be the team that plays Exeter in a couple of weeks. A couple of injuries missing. Obviously, you throw Murray and Earls in if fit, Niall Scannell, a few others, but that team it's not unrealistically close to what you would be putting out for a Champions Cup game. They've put out worse teams in Champions Cup games and lost. So the underperformance was the big worry. Cardiff had backs to the wall. They'd lost 3 games. They'd lost the lead in all 3 games. They had a cause. They were at home. It was a sold out game. It was quite a good game to watch. And Cardiff were excellent. And Cardiff did what they did against Leinster. They won the breakdown battle, but Leinster stayed in the fight and came back in the last 20 minutes when their bench had an impact. Whereas Munster wilted as the game went on and couldn't get to grips with what was going on at the breakdown, and as a result lost the game and missed. Mike Sherry won't want to see that first try ever again. He missed both tackles on it. Stuff like that that shouldn't happen, and you don't expect it from a Munster team with Peter O'Mahony in it. You kind of think when he's there, he sets the tone. It looked a little bit like the kind of performances they were putting in around 2014, 2015 when things were going really bad. It's too early to say that's going to be happening on a weekly basis, because we've no evidence to suggest that. I would expect them to get better as the weeks go on, but they can't go away from home. They can't expect to get a home semi-final and win this competition with performances like that on the road, because it's just not good enough.
And don't forget, you get your comments into us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube and Instagram, streaming live at the moment. We'll put the best of them to Eddie and Rory, and you'll be in the running to be named our Heineken Star Comment of the Week. This week with some off-the-ball branded Heineken goodies and a rugby ball signed by a load of rugby legends, including Messrs O'Driscoll and Woods, to give away. Eddie Lorcan on YouTube says to us, Munster looked like they missed Chris Farrell in the 13 channel. Tate fell off a couple of crucial tackles and Cardiff caused damage in midfield. As always, Munster need a full squad to really fire. There's more than an element of truth in that. Without their full squad to call upon, they look like they can be in trouble and can be got at.
Well, I don't think that was I agree with Rory. It wasn't a particularly weak Munster team. It's a decent Munster team. All right, I know their Earls comes back in, and certainly Conor Murray's a loss. There's no doubt about that. But the thing that worried me about Munster tonight is if you go back to when Cardiff played Leinster, and Leinster were under the cosh, Leinster were able to basically up the tempo of the game and go very direct and physical with Cardiff and see them off. But it's getting their teeth. But they had the capacity to adapt, hold on to the ball and just pound the hell out of Cardiff. Munster never looked like doing that on Friday night, or it just never looked like it was going to happen. And you're just wondering, well, who's going to change that? Who's going to come into the pack and suddenly they're going to up it? I don't see it. That's the thing I don't see. Leinster were able to do that. Leinster can beat you up for whatever they want, but I thought Munster the old Munster would have battened down the hatches and found a way to get a result there. They would have ground it out, but they were actually looked worse at the end of the game than they did at the start, and that's a worry. They could bounce back. Yeah, it's a bit to go, but let's see next weekend. Next weekend will tell a tale. I agree. I think they will beat Ulster, but how well will they play? Because if they have to go to Dublin and get a result or show up, they've really got to get their act together in the next 2 weeks, or then they go into the European games worried about what might happen, and that wasn't in the plan at the start of the season.
How did Carberry look for you at out half on Friday night, Eddie? I know he had a couple of long balls that didn't find touch, and he was blocked down by Thomas Williams a couple of times.
We've always said about Carberry, and I said this at the start of the year, we know what he's good at. He's brilliant on the line, and again, the line break he made the other night was outstanding. But if he's going to play 10 for Munster and Ireland, he has to learn how to manage a game. And it seems to me still, when things aren't going well in front of you, the only guy who's going to get you out of trouble is your 10. He's going to find a way to get the ball in front of the pack. He's going to put the ball in the right place, and he's not going to get blocked down. And the block down was a schoolboy error. He turned onto his right foot with a blocker coming from the right, on his right, it was blocked down, and he's a penchant for getting blocked down. He's not the first time he's been blocked down, and those kind of things really unravel a team when your 10 gets blocked down. Everyone starts to panic a bit. So I don't think he did a particularly good game. We gave him great credit. when he played well done against the Ospreys, but that was an armchair ride. And I said after the Ospreys game, he was going to have tougher tests ahead, and there's a little bit of question mark floating around him now, because whatever about Munster will not function well unless they've got a 10 who's managing the ball for the forwards and managing the game well from. It's absolutely crucial. Every team needs it, but Munster need it like everybody else. And if that's Joey Carbery's, the big part of his game he has to fix is to prove to people he can manage a game under pressure. When you're getting an armchair ride from a pack of forwards like there was the week before, it's very easy to play 10. It's when things are going wrong, you're losing collisions, you're in your own half, things are starting to unravel a bit. The 10 steps up and puts the ball in front of the team, gets them out of trouble, gets them in field position. And that has to be proven yet. I'm not saying he won't do it or he can't do it. It's like to see him do it more. He certainly didn't do it in Cardiff on Friday night.
Whatever about his own progress is another onus on him in the absence of Conor Murray to show that he actually has that game management in his locker as well, Rory.
Yeah, no, completely. But that's why he's there. I mean, the whole last season he played a fair bit of rugby, but very little was at 10. So he's down in Munster ostensibly to play and learn at 10, and that's probably. Look, he's getting massive focus. Like we talked about Jack Carty earlier, who's starting to find maturity at 26. He's 4 or 5 years older than Joey Carbery, who has a huge profile, and every one of his mistakes is going to get picked up and analysed in detail, because everyone sees him as the future and potentially the guy who could start a World Cup game for Ireland or a Six Nations game for Ireland if Johnny Sexton isn't able to play. So he is in the firing line. He's in the spotlight. And that brings its own pressures, and he's learning in a very public place. So he needs to learn from last Friday night and put what he learned into place very, very quickly, because when you're at Connacht or when you're playing for the Leinster A or Munster A, you can make those mistakes, and the only person who notices is your coach, whereas he's doing it in a big arena. And he, because of the nature of his move, because of the hype around that move that we've helped to create, is there's expectation around him, and I think he's talented enough to thrive eventually. But I think part of the things he has to go through these mistakes to learn, because Johnny Sexton was 24 when he made his big kind of moment for Leinster against Munster in that semi-final. Carbery still got 2 years to go on that, so there are going to be difficult days. There's going to be difficult days in a red jersey, and he's playing with new players. He's playing in a new system. It was only his second start, and the ball was crap. The forwards were delivering poor ball for him. Now Johnny Sexton will still be able to manage a game on poor ball because he's so experienced and because he's so good, and we're all comparing him to arguably the best out half in the world. So it's a tough gig for him in some ways, but at the same time he's confident, he's talented. He did some amazing things on Friday. It's just they looked like they came from fullback. He was in the backfield counter-attacking, which is where Leinster thought he did his best work. So it's going to be very interesting watching him this season, because he's going to have some difficult days.
What have I told you about hyperbole and extremes? We have to get more of them in this segment, Rory. We have to get more of them. Eddie, you mentioned Gary Ringrose. He got a try-scoring performance in for Leinster the other night as well. They looked really, really impressive in their victory over Edinburgh at the RDS. All of the tries coming from the backs. Leo Cullen had a little chuckle and a joke afterwards, saying that he wants to see the forwards contribute more, but as far as Leinster are concerned, things are trucking nicely for them. And there's also the influence of Felipe Contepomi coming into that coaching squad as well. Yeah,
look, Leinster have the best team in Europe. I think there's no doubt about that, as far as I'm concerned, because they have the calibre of player they have and the depth they have in their squad. And what that has created for Leinster undoubtedly is this incredible competition within the squad to get your place on the team. I mean, it's a challenge every week to pick a team and keep guys happy, because guys will want to be in there, they want to be playing with that team, and it's a winning team. So it's all good for Leinster at the moment. And I think, teams, the one thing Leinster will find, which is, I think they know, they're not waiting for anybody else to tell them, is that every week for them is a tough game, because no matter who you're playing, everyone's afraid to play Leinster, because if you get it wrong, they'll put 50 points on you. So everybody pitches up against Leinster week in, week out, no matter who you are, whether you're the Dragons, whether you're Treviso, whether you're as a Cardiff, it doesn't matter. Everyone pitches up. So they don't get any easy games, which in a way, because there's so much competition in the squad, they don't get any easy games, and they're managing to win games and pull away in the end. That puts them in a very, very good place as a team. And, it's hard to, if at the moment if Leinster lose a game, it tends to be because they've contributed to that. they've made some mistakes that they didn't expect to make. But when Leinster tick all the boxes, they're almost impossible to beat. And I know, that Edinburgh played their guts out the other night and still came up short. And I think they were happy to get out of it in the end without getting a hiding, because that's what happens when you come to the RDS. If you make a few mistakes, you get a hiding. And Cockrell said that much after. He said he was happy how well Edinburgh played against Leinster and put it up to them. No, at the end of the day, they still beat Edinburgh by 24 points. So that's the context that teams are looking at them in. So it's a good place at the moment. There just seems to be carrying on from where they left off last year, which is not an easy thing to do. There doesn't be any sense of complacency slipping in. And they're still the team to beat, I think, not just in the Pro 14 but in Europe. How
do you go about beating them, Murray?
I'm glad it's not my job to figure that out, because their pressure game on Saturday was phenomenal. Their tries came, the moves were really impressive, but it was how almost they got the ball in those positions in the first place. So Devin Toner, charging down the scrum half, pressure on him. James Lowe getting forced into the touch, but managing to throw the ball off an opponent and win a line out, a scrum penalty. All of these scores came from they got themselves in positions because of their own pressure game. There's nowhere when Saracens were flying, people were saying, God, would they win the Six Nations? You look at Leinster, they are an international calibre team. They're probably the club equivalent, and like Saracens were at their peak as well, of the All Blacks, in that their pressure game is so good that they force teams into errors, that they show you nowhere to go, that teams can go through 39 phases in the 22 but find no way through. Now, Edinburgh went quite a limited game plan. I think you need to show way more than what Edinburgh did. I still think there's teams in Europe who can beat them. I think Saracens could. Claremont aren't in the European Cup this year, but I think they possibly could as well, because they're showing signs of being quite good this year. Racing on their day probably could. Racing possibly should have beaten them in the European Cup final. But in terms of the Pro 14, there's very few teams who, when Leinster are at their best, can match them or come close to matching them. We saw it when Scarlets have been the second best team in this league for the last couple of years, blown away. Glasgow have been pretty close as well, blown away in the European Cup last year. They are an excellent, relentless rugby team. Who can beat you any way you want. So they're the kind of team, if you want to go tight against them, they'll happily go into the trenches. They've the two best ball carrying props in probably in the world. They're just so dynamic, they've unbelievable set piece, they've everything. They tick every box, and I think they're going to be hard stopped in both competitions this year as long as they keep Sexton fit. And particularly in the Pro 14, they'll get their home semi-final. That gives them a week off. It puts them almost 1 foot in. Home semi-final, week off, puts them in the final, and you wouldn't want to be playing them.
In the immediate future, Eddie, how do Connacht go about putting them on the back foot next weekend?
Well, when you play a team like Leinster, you have to think outside the box. You can't just go out and run your normal standard. If I was playing Leinster in the morning, I would hold on to the ball at all costs, because one thing you can predict is at least if you have the ball, it's very hard for them to score. And we saw a bit of that, with the Dragons, the week before last in the RDS. The Dragons kicked the ball to Leinster and they were just drowning. They were on their goal line, making tackle after tackle. And come to half time, the same thing happened. But the Dragons held on to the ball once or twice and they went through 20 phases and nearly scored. Now, that's the kind of mentality you have to bring. If you're kicking the ball to Leinster, just won't give it back to you. They just don't give it back. They just prepare to run, set it up, and they just grind you down relentlessly. 20, 25, 30, 35 phases later, your heels are on the goal line, and the inevitable is going to happen. And you probably get somebody put in the bin as well, to just double down, because you've given away so many penalties. So the only way to play them is not giving the ball. And when they have the ball, you've got to defend like your life depends on it. But when you have it, don't give it back to them. And that's easier said than done, but I would be of the opinion that less possession they have, the better chance you have of reeling them in.
5:15 at the sports ground. They've even put in extra terracing for that game as well, and it is a 7:35 start next Saturday from Munster and Ulster down at Thomond Park. For now, Eddie O'Sullivan, thanks so much, and Rory O'Connor from the Irish Independent, thanks for joining us.
Cheers, Richie.
Monday Night Rugby on Off the Ball
with Eir Sport. Both Munster v Leinster derbies exclusively live on Eir Sport.